Hi, everybody. So I'm actually in the same room as Jacob. We're going to be doing this nutshell here from beautiful and cold Madison. First, I'd like to thank our sponsors, which are the Hegner Family Foundation, as well as North Central SARE. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to bring you these discussions for free. So we're so appreciative of their support for us. And we're also so thankful for all of you in joining us tonight, which really makes this all worthwhile. So thank you also to Jacob for being with us tonight. Jacob is a 6th-generation farmer with Greenfire Farms in Monticello, Wisconsin, so that's about 40 minutes south of Madison. He's currently working with us on a Silvopasture project, a grant. So we're looking at the best practices for establishing Silvopasture projects, and he's going to be talking a little bit about that tonight, but he's going to really focus on multi-species grazing within establishing a Silvopasture and just on his farm in general. So I'll turn it over to Jacob, and if he wants to introduce himself more, and if he wants to launch into the presentation, which I'm really excited for.
All right, well, let's get started. Thank you for the introduction, Christy. Again, my name is Jacob Marty. I'm a 6th-generation farmer from Monticello, Wisconsin. I farm with my father, and today I wanted to, this nutshell presentation, talk about getting started with multi-species grazing, give you a little bit of background on my journey and what I've been learning, what I consider myself experienced or knowledgeable in at least what 3 years can do for you. And just kind of share the entire process that I've gone through. It's kind of hard to know what people's backgrounds are, what experience levels they're at. So I kind of wanted to touch base on stuff and lay the framework out there, and then have a lot of time for questions and answers where I think the most context can come in, and people can really dive into the details and figure out. But I can really share. I mean, I've only been doing this for a few years. This will be my 4th season coming up this summer, and I got a degree from UW-Stevens Point with a degree in wildlife ecology, research, and management. So I have a background in ecology, and my values are centered around conservation and agriculture. So I tried to bring those two together after I graduated from college and bring it back to my family farm. And my family farm, let's see if I can go click through. Okay. Yeah. So before I get into more of the history of my farm, my farm's name is Greenfire Farm. It's inspired by Elda Leopold. And so I just made a silly promise to myself when I was younger that anytime I do a presentation, I do a quote by Elda Leopold, which got me on this track to do regenerative agriculture on our family farm. So bear with me. By Elda Leopold, in his book Sand County Almanac, the essay To Think Like a Mountain, we reached the old wolf in time to watch a fierce green fire dying in her eyes. I realized then and have known ever since that there was something new to me in those eyes, something known only to her and to the mountain. I was young then and full of trigger itch. I thought that because fewer wolves meant more deer, that no wolves would mean hunter's paradise. But after seeing the green fire die, I sensed it neither the wolf nor the mountain agreed with such a view. And this quote's coming from when he was a younger man. He shot a wolf while he was at work, actually, in the southwest United States. He was working on at a park, and I just saw a lot of parallels with his experience and my own. I can definitely see that I'm young and full of trigger itch sometimes, but I'm trying to think how the land really wants things. So Elda Leopold's been a huge influence on my life and my values, and I try to move forward with the farm and follow his footsteps. So what we're doing at Greenfire Farm is we're now raising grass-fed beef, grass-fed lamb, and we also raise chickens, both meat birds and laying hens, turkeys, and pork out on pasture. We're implementing a lot of the organic practices and doing rotational grazing. And again, this will be our 4th year doing that. We have all those classes of livestock, and we've transitioned over 250 acres into rotational grazing for the different species in the last 3 years. So before 2015, the farm was a conventional dairy farm with hay and row crops. Some was used for our own feed on the farm, and some was sold. But most of it was used to produce milk that my father used to make a living. So he was a dairy farmer for 4 decades. This family goes back onto this land back to the 1850s, and for 6 generations of foresters, farmers, cheesemakers. So we have a rich history. We're rooted in our community, and we want to be there for a long time. And so 6 generations, and I hope that the things I'm doing on this farm makes it better for 6 generations from now. So you have a little bit better of an idea of put a face to the voice that you're hearing, and you might see at least a little bit of a picture of me up in the corner. But this is me at the beginning of the journey. This is back in 2015, April 15th. I remember it very clearly. And this was a cornfield that we started to seed down in the hopes of a rotational grazing setup. We did 50 acres to start out. So our total farm is 400 acres. 80 of it is in woods. So we have about 300 to 320 that is in agricultural use. I try to avoid the word tillable because we're trying to avoid tillage on our farm. Acres in 2015 to 90 acres in 2016, and last year we were off to the races and we put another 160 acres into a total of 250 acres in rotational grazing. Here's some more pictures of me. In the top left corner, I love watching cow pies and seeing the health of my girls and seeing how the forage, the energy levels, and the protein levels, and the nutrients in general, how that's going. And I have a couple pictures from a few years ago when we had the chickens out on the pasture, and we had a new litter of piglets farrowed in the fall as well. So I try to build some credibility at least. And this is my father, again, in front of that field. He might have been a little bit more sad to see the cornfield go, but not so much anymore. So what am I doing? With the farm, with implementing all these things, we're really trying to mimic natural communities. With the Savannah Institute, we understand that in this area, savanna ecosystems or communities are an adaptable community and make the most of the climatic conditions and the soils that are present in our communities. And that's a little bit of a later successional community type. So right now we're really focusing on getting grasslands going and then eventually planting trees. We did do a silvopasture planting in 2016 to kind of have a pilot test, and I'll go into that a little bit. But right now we're really off to the races, taking a lot of land out of corn and beans and putting it into diversified or very diverse polycultures of grassland pasture. And the hopes of this is that it results in healthier soil. We have a closed or increased functioning nutrient and energy cycling on the farm and in the pastures, and that the water cycle is improved and water is utilized correctly. It's saved and dealt with if there's an abundance of it. And for my wildlife background, I really want to provide a lot of habitat, and knowing that grasslands, we can raise ruminants, and historically it was bison and other large herbivores, but now we're using the substitutes of our domesticated cattle to produce food, but at the same time there's plenty of other animals that are using our pasture for a place to live and carry out their lives, reproduce, and eat and that's what we're really hoping, or that's what I'm really hoping for, is one of the main goals of the farm. And the more that we're able to keep a community intact, we're hoping that diversity will return to our farms. When in the past, a cornfield really was dominated by one species in all different classes of life, that now there's different species in the pasture, and there's different types of animals, and that are living there residentially or as a temporary and going through this. So we're really hoping to have vibrant and beautiful communities on our farm that are also resilient and robust and happy and fulfilling for the people that and the living animals that live there. And so I try to say that I'm regenerative. I'm not quite yet, I wouldn't, if I'm honest, saying we're really focusing on trying to achieve that, but it's really difficult. So there's 3 different levels that I try to classify what we're trying to do. And there's degenerative, which is not giving back to the land, is eventually lowering the quality. And you don't hear many people saying that they're degenerative because they don't want to, either they just don't want that known or they're not thinking about that. Sustainable is thrown out there a lot, and that's really keeping the same level of production or health or any type of metric at the same level indefinitely, and hoping that you're not taking away from the quality of the land. But what we're really trying to focus on is becoming regenerative, which is what, if we're mimicking natural communities, that's what they tend to do. They build in health and in abundance over time, and that they really, other than in catastrophic issues or occurrences and other issues, that they really they trend upwards. And that's the hope and the premise behind our practices on the farm. So this was in 2015, the first year. You see there was a lot of corn still around. There's hay fields, and in the back corner, I don't know if you can, does my mouse show up on it? Back here is our cattle on that 50 acres, about in that same spot that my picture was taken from. If you look at the same view right now, all this would be green in pasture. And I want to make something known too, that before I get too far ahead of myself, if you have any questions, I have the chat up here, and I'll try to keep an eye on that and see if I can answer something really quickly. Otherwise, at the end, we'll have a good question and answer section. So it's an aerial view of our farm, and kind of covered that already. That it's about 250 acres in rotational grazing, and we have a silvopasture in this area, which I'll show you later. So we're really trying to create oak savannas ecosystems or communities. Here's some representation of what that looks like. So they're pretty open. They vary between, I think the definition is 30 and 70% canopy cover, usually with a dominant older tree dispersed throughout, and then the understory with a little bit of shrubs and middle canopy trees, but mainly it's open ground where there's a lot of prairie and grassland species of forage dominating the ground floor. And the idea is that these type of communities across the world are very, very productive and cover a lot of ground across the world. And so here's a little time lapse of this watering hole in an African savanna. This may be a little bit cherry-picked to show that there's a lot of animals, but just seeing that in this proximity of this watering hole, that there's this many animals visit this watering hole in 24 hours, just shows that there's a lot of potential in these type of communities to have a very functioning and healthy community. And we found that in this area, those oak savannas have been pretty dominant in this region of the world. Mainly dominated by, again, those bison, but there was mastodons and other ice age herbivores and megafauna that were dominating the landscapes and having disturbance on the plants that were in their communities. The idea is that we can use that in the modern day to our advantage and have trees in our production systems that our livestock are able to use as forage sources. And so this is really popular in Spain with the pork there, eating off of nuts from perennial crops. We're hoping to do that as well. Another tree that is really prominent on our farm is mulberry, very high protein berries and fruits that go to our our animals as well eventually. But again, we're starting with just grassland. And so this is a picture of our pasture in its second year, and this is what we're trying to create. You can see there's a lot of diversity in there between broadleaves, legumes, grasses. There's really only one layer, though. There's no shrubs or anything in there. This is what most of our farm looks like right now, as we've really tried to implement grassland and pasture as far as we can on the pasture, or on the farm. This is another picture. There's some other species coming in. Chicory, there's plantain, dandelions. But really, we're really trying to focus on diversity so that we have a more even production level of forage throughout the year, and we can even that out. A little zoomed in and close up of what our pasture is. So this is what our cattle are eating. We're also, all of our livestock are raised out on the pasture during the grazing season, May through November, until the water lines freeze. And also there's some wildlife here, some monarchs coming back to the farm. But just want to show you just what we're working with and what we've been able to get established in just a very short period of time. In our area, we have very fertile soils, and I'll talk about how that is related to the silvopasture planting. But in general, our farm is very fertile, and so when we plant in the pasture and into these different forbs and grasses, they love it, and they produce very quickly and at a high rate. And we're also seeing a lot of the other support species in the community come back too. Lots of fungi around in our pastures. And here's another picture. I'm trying to demonstrate just how tall our grasses are. With our rotational grazing, the cattle will be on a single paddock for just a single day, and then they'll be moved the next day, and they won't come back to that same paddock for. It varies depending on different goals, but in general, 45 to 55 days. So the grasses are constantly having a lot of rest to be able to grow. Put as much roots down into the soil, dig deeper, develop more relationships with the soil microbiology, and to become basically more stronger and more established. And just trying to show again that we're tall. We're grazing probably knee-high forage on our farm. And this is the same pasture. After the cattle have come through, and they eat pretty much the top third of the plant. They leave a lot of residual back behind that protects the soil from drying out, and also leaves plenty of green material on the plant that allows it to bounce back quickly after being grazed. So I don't have any kids, so my pictures I get to show people on my wall are pictures of my cattle and some of my livestock. So again, our main thing on our farm is we have grass-fed beef. Last year we raised over 200 head out on pasture, completely rotationally grazed, 100% grass-fed and grass-finished. We did a leader-follower system. I don't want to touch too much on that unless people are really interested in hearing more about that. But I can talk about that in the question and answer section. But we also have a flock of about 400 to 500 laying hens that share the same pastures. They don't move around the entire farm just because they don't need as much space, so they have a much slower rotation. And I can go into how the different species are relating to each other, if they're leader followers in between species or not. But we have a free-range flock of laying hens too. And our pigs are also raised out on pasture. And here's sheep. This was 2 years ago when we first got them, utilizing electric netting to keep in most of our livestock. Here's some of the sheep now too with lambing. And one of the things that we've really had, I said my goals in the farm are to bring back wildlife and diversity. And in 3 years, we've seen a lot of species come back to the farm that I never saw on the farm growing up. Those included woodcock and bobolinks, which have been really exciting to see. And then we have tons of voles and field mice and the rodents, which are the base of the food web, coming back to our farm and just really flourishing, which means we have lots of birds of prey coming back, and the fox and the coyotes are eating those rather than messing with our livestock. So we're really seeing that our farm is really coming alive, which when I was younger, I never really saw my farm as a place of where there's a lot of wildlife, other than maybe some deer here and there. But we've also seen minnows come back to our streams. And lots of burrows, sign of wildlife around, and insects. So how do we do this? Well, I told you that we went from 50 acres to 90 acres to 250 acres. And all of our pasture has been done in partnership with the NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, with the USDA, underneath the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP. It's really variable around the country and what's available, but in my experiences, I highly recommend it. I've been very pleased with what we've been able to have in relationship with our local NRCS agents. We've had good funding, and we haven't been ever denied a contract. And so what we've been underneath the Honeybee and Pollinator Initiative the last couple years, and we're actually ranked one of the #1. I guess they have a ranking system to determine who gets granted their contracts, which are cost shared for the different implementing and establishment costs of setting up rotational grazing systems. And so we were actually commonly ranked one of the top in Wisconsin. But I think that's great for anyone that's interested in these types of systems, and there's a lot of help and support there. And it's even better for beginning farmers or underserved farmers like myself. You get a little bit of extra, I don't know what word they call it, but your contract is higher, it's funded more than someone that has been historically not underserved. So I can talk a little bit about that too, if that's of interest. But mainly veterans, minorities, females, and beginning farmers are the big ones that are classified as underserved. The government typically has a reputation for not being flexible, but in my opinion, they've been very flexible in what I've been trying to do. There's a lot of times that I came to them and said, I want to do something a little bit above and beyond what you're hoping, and they were able to talk about it, and I've always been able to go ahead with the way that I wanted to do it. I was hoping a different slide, but what this covered for me was the fencing equipment and install, the cost of that. They have a rate for how much per linear feet that they'll cost share you for. The water lines that we have going out throughout our pastures, the water tanks, and the initial seed for the establishment of the pasture. And then they also have a 3-year prescribed grazing. So if you're grazing it, they give you a payment per acre to make sure that you're giving you a little bit of help as you get established and get started, and they want you to follow their grazing plan. I've had just a very rewarding experience with them, and I highly recommend at least looking into it. It may not for everyone, but for us, it's made us be able to do a whole lot more, a lot quicker, and with a lot less risk. And we also use the Conservation Stewardship Program. So I have 2 different contracts. I'm not going to talk a ton about this program just because it's a little bit up in the air, and the rumors out there is that they might get cut. And the 2 different contracts that I have are completely different. My first contract required me to do the different practices on the farm that I was already doing with the rotational grazing. But in addition to that, to host a field day, which I did with the Savannah Institute and Southwest Badger and a few other different groups, We had to try to get our calving season to be during the natural season, which is in spring or late spring, early summer, May and June. And then to provide most of our nitrogen requirements for our pasture with nitrogen fixing cover or animal manure, which was really easy because we wanted a diversity, and we have a lot of legumes in our pasture already. So basically, didn't have to do anything for those last two yet. And then we also put ramps, escape ramps, in our water tanks, so that if any birds or bats or any animals found themselves in the tanks, that they would be able to get out. So relatively, like, stuff that we wanted to do anyways, fit into what we're trying to do in our values, and really wasn't that much work, but it gives you an incentive to do it, and really just helps with the establishment phase of setting up a system like this, especially from scratch. And then my last contract that I had was completely different, and that just required me to plant a 1 acre pollinator planting. Again, something that I love to do, and the money is out there that helps me, and the money that I'm able to use for that is money that I can save and put towards other things that are dealt with running a business and running a farm. So I know that in the description it wanted me to talk about this a little bit. So other opportunities, those are the ones that I've used in the past, but I know the U.S. Fish and Wildlife has similar type of programs that they're not exactly the same, and but they have a little bit more flexibility with what they can do. That might be interest to people to go look, to reach out and see what's out there. There's tons of different grants through all different types of foundations and government agencies that you can look up, and networking and trying to get on listservs and that, you'll find a lot of resources out there to help you, especially with small sustainable farms. There's a lot of people out there trying to help them. Partnerships, like Southwest Badger, they have a mentorship program. If you're interested in learning, you have no background in livestock, or you don't know what to do with grazing, you can join in with the mentorship program through like Southwest Badger in Wisconsin, and I'm sure there's other similar type of organizations throughout the country and maybe the world too that help with this. But just look out for those. I know with the Southwest Badger, there was an incentive to take on a mentor and help them, teach them about what we're doing, and teach them grazing skills, and they actually were able to reimburse us for some of that time. And maybe going forward, getting partnerships with municipalities or counties to confront some of their conservation issues. In Wisconsin, phosphorus runoff and water treatment is a huge issue, so I know there's communities around the state that are looking at partnering with their farms to help them, to have them protect their streams and their water bodies from having too much of a pollution load. So maybe looking out for those. There's just a lot of help out there, in my opinion, and that I've been able to find. And again, it's just out there, and you just have to go look and be willing to work with other people. So I can answer plenty of questions about that type of stuff in my experiences. Okay, so from the scratch, again, the EQIP funding helped a lot with the different getting established. Another thing that helped us save money was we purchased most of our supplies through a small procurement company, I guess, called B Eco Development in Nashville. My friend Blake Santa Robbins helped us save a lot of money on that. So if someone's looking, he has experience with helping people get set up. I've done all 3 of my different contracts and gotten other people in my community to I guess, locate or source all their supplies through him. And so that's just one place to look, but you can also do it through a lot of there's different companies throughout the different communities that do this type of service. But that's the one I've used and been very happy with. So in Pasture, we seeded on April 15th, and we were able to start our daily moves and rotations in July, and we're focusing on having high energy forage, giving it a lot of long rest, and having high productivity with our soils. So setting up this, we have this little bit of a dilemma with doing anything. You can usually pick 2 or 3 things. You can either be fast and good, which is not going to be cheap. You can be good and cheap, but it's probably not going to be fast. Or you can be fast and cheap, but it's probably not going to be good. So that good, fast, cheap, you can only be 2 or 3. What we focused on was trying to do things fast. So again, 250 acres in 3 years, and do it well. So it wasn't cheap necessarily, but that's where those things I just covered, those different funds that are out there, can help you cover that that little bit more of an expense. So we put in all of our own systems, so our water lines, our fencing. We bought our equipment, and for that, and because of that, it wasn't quite as cheap, but we were able to also basically hire our own labor and install this. So we were able to put up 4 main paddocks on the one side initially in our pasture. And again, we created large, vast grasslands and pasture systems that we were able to subdivide with the water lines, but also then temporary single electrified poly wire, which works very, very quickly and slick to manage large herds or small herds of livestock. Okay, so we also did silvopasture, and I want to talk about that. How much time do I have left?
You're fine.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. So our silvopasture. In 2016, 2 years ago, we did kind of a pilot 8-acre tree planting, and I'll go into the discussion or how that worked. But our goals for that were, we knew that our farm is pretty spread out, and this was in the only location that we really felt like we could do that was really far away from the farm. So using the principles in permaculture of using the different zones for how intensive it could be, we knew that our silvopasture pilot planting was going to be far away, more of a zone 3, zone 4. We're not going to be there very often, not going to be able to spend a lot of time there, and we focused on what value we can get out of this planting based on that. And so what we hoped for was not something that was production or commercial based for human food, but that we could raise our animals out there, and eventually those trees could be managed to provide forage for our livestock, which would be free in a sense every year, that we wouldn't have to pay. It would also diversify their diets. It also provide some relief from the sun. Again, we're starting from open cornfields, so there's no trees, no shade. So getting trees out there to provide shade and windbreak is really important. And then we also want to provide some aesthetics for our farm. So we chose different species that we hope that eventually they can be pretty, basically, and beautiful on our farm for just the straight value of having that for ourselves, but also for the people that come to our farm for our products. So to establish, we started at 8 acres, and we planted about 1,000 different trees in April. Planting them in April is kind of key for how we did it. The pasture was seeded the year before and grazed 3 times the previous year, so there wasn't a big, thick like sod layer or anything. It was a little patchy still, but in April there wasn't a whole lot of grass growing or anything. So when we planted these trees, they didn't have to compete right away. We did a little bit of a pseudo key line or contour planting, and I have a little diagram to show how what that looks like. We did 45-foot row spacing between the rows, and then with the idea that we would graze cattle, sheep, and pigs in between the alleys while the trees were maturing. And so to put that 45-foot spacing in the rows, we actually used a tree planter and just drove along where we wanted the row to be and create a furrow. But then we actually did use a tree planter to plant the actual trees. We used a shovel and hand planted everything on a 10-foot inter-row spacing. In the rows, we used a modified gnat pattern. So the gnat pattern comes from a permaculture orchard a DVD that's available, and it's very, very informative, and we wanted to use that. And what the pattern does is it uses nitrogen-rich tree like honey locust or another nitrogen fixing. For us, we used redbud, and then it did an apple and a pear, and then again repeating the NAP, the nitrogen fixing tree, apple, pear. And by doing that, they create diversity naturally. And so any types of pest, disease, or animals or anything like that that wanted to target, say, an apple tree, for it to pass on to another apple tree, it would have to go through other trees that it might not be able to affect. And that's more places that there's spiders, excuse me, spiders, insects, parasitic wasps, frogs, birds, that they could be eaten, or there's just more distance from like fungal and bacterial diseases to be able to travel. So the idea is that diversity helps lower the amount of sprays or maintenance or any type of labor that you need to put into these types of systems. And so we took that NAP pattern and modified it to create more of a savanna or eventual savanna. So for us, we used a chestnut, pecan, oak, or basswood as a canopy tree species, and we followed that in the next 10 feet. We used an apple or a pear. After that, in our 10 feet, we'd use a redbud, which was a nitrogen-rich tree, and it would be the aesthetics as well. And then another 10 feet, we would do the other. So if we did an apple before, we do pear, or vice versa. And then we start again with a canopy tree and start the entire thing over. The idea is that hopefully in a couple decades that we'll have different levels of growth and different trees producing forage for our animals. For our tree tubes, we use Miracle Pro, Blue X, and Arbor Shield. I'll go into those a little bit. And then we also use a root dip, an arbuscular mycorrhizae. I think it's important to point out that using an endomycorrhizae inoculant is better than ectomycorrhizae. So that's what we use, and I think that was huge for the health of our plants. So this is a picture showing where we planted this. We left the ends open on the north and the south end of that paddock so that cattle or livestock could move easily from paddock 1 to 4 and back over without having to go through trees. And you can see that that there's this contour here, and we put our trees in a somewhat a pseudo contour thing. In hindsight, we really didn't need to do that based on our soil type. We had very clayey soils and it's enough down the slope that really, unless we have a massive, massive drought, we have a lot of water being held in our soils, and moisture is not an issue for us. So I see the benefit of having a key line or a contour planting, but for us, we did a little bit of it, but we didn't stay strictly to it. And here's a little diagram showing, again, how our trees were spaced. So again, plenty of room for the grass to be growing in between. Again, there's a 45-foot spacing in between rows. And then we have the canopy trees. And so this is what it kind of looked like. So this is a tree, an apple that we planted in that April, and this was in October before all the trees were lost all their leaves. And this apple went from about 12 to 18 inches as just a little sapling. It went to over that 5-foot tall tree tube into about 7 feet tall in one season. So that's what we're dealing with our soil and our moisture and basically what we have for conditions. This tree tube here is a Miracle Pro, and I have more information in a little bit. And we also use these blue tree tubes called Blue X. Here's a picture of our pigs in that alley. If you can kind of see, we got the blue right here, and then we'd have another row of trees right here. And so there's a 45-foot spacing right here for the pigs or the sheep for the cattle to graze in. Okay, and they spent all summer and all season out there. And there's those pictures of that litter that I was playing with earlier in that picture. So with our establishment, after that, what was our tree upkeep? I'm pretty hands-off, and based on the location, again, this is a little bit more remote from our nucleus of our farm, so we did no irrigation in the establishment of our trees or anything. We had water buckets that we might have used for the root inoculant that we might have just poured down when we put them in, but not all of our trees got that. So we had no regular irrigation other than what we naturally got with rainfall. We did no regular mowing or weed management, which you'll hear is a big no-no for tree establishment. But what we did is we got away with it because our soils were so fertile and they held so much moisture that the competition from other forage is not as much. I guess it's not as limited or as competitive. So the long forage actually ended up maturing, and then it would success and get pushed down or fall over and create a mat eventually, which actually kept other competition from occurring and created a little bit of a moisture barrier so that the soil stayed moist, and our trees just loved it. And so without any type of regular mowing or weed management, our trees were able to still do very well. We would mow the fence lines or knock over and crimp the fence lines for electric netting when we need it, but most of our trees for most of the year did not have any mowing around them. The reason why was because we had low labor availability with all the other classes of livestock and things that we're doing on the farm. We didn't have a whole lot of time to come to mow and upkeep 1,000 trees. So we went into it at the beginning knowing that we might not have the most production or the quickest growth, but that was what we were willing to sacrifice. One issue that we had was we had to constantly stand up the tree tubes, and I'll get into why that is. And in the future, we're going to have to fill in some of the pig wallows by the waters and just where they're rooting, and then we have to seed mudded areas. So especially in the fall, the grass isn't growing as much and it's wetter, and so the pigs have a little bit more demand. They muddy up a lot, or even just cattle muddying up around their waters. We sometimes have to seed those areas back. And we need to understand that, like the livestock, what we're doing is we're using them as a tool to manage the forage, the amount of forage in the silvopasture and in the alleys. And different tools work different ways. So if we manage the pigs the same as the cows, that'd be different. Then they might not be able to thrive, or they might have a different effect on the land. And so we're found that in that spacing of 45 foot, the best animals to raise would be pigs and sheep. And the reason why is cattle in a large herd, they need to eat a whole lot more than pigs and sheep do. So they need to have much larger areas and larger paddock sizes. And so if it's only 45 feet wide, it's a lot of fence that you're putting up, and they're going to trample a lot more. So to manage the livestock with the cows, up in the top left, we have the polywire, electrified polywire with a stepping post that we use. The electrified perimeter fence jumps onto the polywire, and we're able to manage our cattle that way. And for our pigs, we use in this top right a Gallagher smart fence. There's 3 to 4 strand. We just use 3 strands, and we can put up 300 plus feet of 3 strands in about 5 minutes and take it down in 5 minutes. It's very slick. It's very useful and very flexible. We really, really like those. We have a lot of smart fence going on. For our turkeys and chickens, we're using the Salatin style chicken tractors. This isn't actually a picture from our farm, but just demonstrating what we're using on our pasture. And then we use variety of different types of water sources down in the pasture. This is a pig water here. No tank that they would need to, that they would be tempted to try to bathe and swim in. Okay, so lessons learned. One of the big things that we would try to do is go from 45 foot to 60 foot. The 45 foot has about 20% more trees than the 60 foot would. So if you had a closer and you're focusing more on the commercial aspect and selling a marketable fruit or nut, you might want to go to 30 feet or 45 feet. But for our farm, the emphasis is on livestock. And so having actually wider alleys, like 60 feet or 75 feet, we'd be able to have more efficient use of our time to put up fence, and rather than having more rectangular paddocks, we'd have more square paddocks. And that would be for pigs and sheep. If we're going to look to graze cattle in them, we'd probably want to go up to 200 feet wide, as long as you have a decent, or not decent, but a relatively large or moderate sized herd, just based on the size of the paddocks that they need on a daily basis. If you need to have a 2-acre paddock and it can only be 200 feet wide, it's going to be really long, which means you have to put up a lot of fence. So you really need to focus on what your goals are going to be for your livestock classes going into the future, project that out, and figure out what you're planning on doing. So, and base your spacing of your rows on that. And also a narrower alley. If you're going to mow, and say your mowing width is like 3 or 4 feet, you're going to do that on both sides. So if it's 4 feet and you mow it on both sides, that's 8 feet out of your 45-foot width that is being mowed and not being able to even. So that's another thing to consider. The wider your alleys go, the less percentage your mowing area is. We had that contour or pseudo-contour planting. Would you want that, or do you want linear? And it really depends on what type of goals you have. For our chickens, we have the greenhouse, which are in these shelters, and they can only really move straight forward and back with a little bit of turning, but they cannot go around sharp curves. So for them, we'd want more of a linear planting. And the same thing for cattle, too, with those large paddocks. Would sporadic plantings work better? Rather than having to fence off the trees, could you just have them out there and not do any electric fencing around them? Maybe you can use these arbor shield trees, and I have a picture of that to explain why that would work. For tree tubes, we found that the Tree Pro, the Miracle Pro tubes work so much better than the Blue X. And the arbor shield works very well to defend off or protect the trees from the livestock. And our biggest mistake that we made was in our stakes and posts that we used to support the tree tubes. The tree tubes have to use that, and so we, with one of the companies, we used their wooden stakes, and in our clay soils, the bigger stakes were really tough to get more than a foot into the ground. So they were really top heavy and not very stable. They had thinner stakes that were only like a 1/2 inch that they went in a lot easier, but they were a lot more difficult. So post, we lost a lot of our, I guess, investment just by having 4 stakes and posts for our tree tubes. So here's a diagram showing this sporadic planting. And planting 1 would be more of a sporadic thing. If you had these protected individually with an arbor shield, you could put your electric fencing anywhere you wanted and just basically ignore where the trees are. But if you planted them in more of in a dense pattern with just a regular tree tube like a Miracle Pro or Blue Shield, the cattle or the livestock would just destroy them eventually. You need to have like an arbor shield if they're going to be freely in with the trees and not fenced off. In the second paddock, we have the linear. This would work well if you're planning on having that straight line greenhouse shelter, but might not work very well if you have the cattle, because you're basically creating very long rectangles. that you need to fence, and that they are very efficient to fence and costly if you value your time. In paddock 3, we have linear with, again, the similar type spacing, but because it's across rather than vertical, or horizontal rather than vertical, we're able to have a better, more efficient paddock size and shape. So it really, again, depends on what livestock and what size livestock of groups you're going to have. So the tree tubes. We found that the Blue X, just to stay away from them, they do not work in a livestock incorporated system. They're too flimsy, and also their top edge is sharp. So if a tree does manage to get big enough, the wind will blow it and it'll cut itself and girdle itself on the top of the tree tube. They're also very, very slow to install. I would just really recommend not using Blue X tree shelters. The Miracle Tube tree shelters were good price. They're pretty sturdy. Sheep and pigs will still destroy them sometimes, but the sheep sometimes they can handle the sheep. Cattle are going to destroy any type of tree tube unless it's these arbor shields, and this is the same for the pigs as well. And this arbor shield is basically like an inside-out barbed wire fence that has barbs sticking out to keep the cattle from rubbing on or trying to find the leaves through it. So arbor shield's really expensive. I actually had this wrong, that the arbor shield is 0 to 5. That's for the stakes. The arbor shield by itself is $15. So, but you'd also be able to reuse that. So if you're going to incorporate livestock and have them next to it, you're going to want to go with arbor shield. If you're going to fence them off, I would really highly recommend the Miracle Tube tree shelters. And so here's the Miracle Tube tree shelters, still standing up. We have really high speeds of winds that sometimes knock these over, and they're not going to hold up to if a sheep or a pig or a cow is rubbing on them, which in our wide open spaces, they like scratching posts because they don't have anything else to rub on. So that's something to consider. And there's a picture, you can see the smart fence being fenced off about a foot from the trees. So the stakes, rather than using wood stakes in the future when we do some tree plantings, we're going to either go with fiberglass or potentially rebarb, depending on what price we can get those at. Again, with the stake, you're going to want to make sure that you're getting it over a foot deep, maybe 18 inches, to make sure that it's really stable and it can hold up. So I would look to have like maybe a 2/3 inch fiberglass rod, which would be nice because they're pretty light. You can reuse it. After its whole lifespan's over, one concern is that it's not environmentally friendly. It's going to have to go to the landfill. When like wood, you can compost it or burn it or whatever. But the rebar would also be useful, but it's going to be very heavy, and depending on your what type of equipment you have, it can be pretty cumbersome. But you might also be able to find that quite a bit cheaper. But we found that with just the initial, you're going to make an investment to plant the trees. You need to have that additional investment to protect the trees and to have a good stake. If you kind of cut your costs on one of those three things, you have the risk of it all coming apart. So that's kind of the end of what we really learned with this silvopasture planting. We're still learning a lot. We've lost a decent amount, but the trees that have survived are just doing really, really well. And the main thing is you just want to try to keep the livestock off them until they're really old. But I want to end up my formal presentation. I jacked this slide from Peter Allen, but I just loved it so much because this is what we're trying to do with our farm. We're trying to move from like a civilization to ecological paradigm, moving from simple and linear to complex and nonlinear, and integrating things rather than separating and reducing them from each other. having cooperation and resilience, competition and efficiency, and then focusing on how we fit within our landscape, our farm, our community, being ecocentric rather than how everything can feed us and being egocentric. And the work that we need to do, this is, if you search Utopia on Google, you're going to find a lot of pictures like this. And I'm trying to work towards having a world where this is the type of utopia. And this is kind of too, I guess, maybe a little too colorful and romanticized. But we find plenty of colors out on our farm with rainbows and sunsets that make our farm very beautiful. And I think in my older years, I'm going to have a lot of beauty on our farm with our tree plantings and what we're doing on our farm. So I want to leave you with that. Here's my contact information. I'm happy to answer any questions through text, email, or add me on Facebook and send me a message. Be happy to share what I've learned. Again, I'm not wise. I haven't. No. I'm not an expert by any means, but I can share what I've learned. And I think I've done a lot. I've been doing a lot of work, and I can be open with what I've done. So with that, I just want to say thanks for sticking through this. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jacob. That was great. A great presentation. I'm going to turn it over to the question and answer period. And here we have a question by Emily.
Hi, I was wondering where you got the plants from.
Okay, so that's perfect segue, because I got all my trees through the bulk buying program through the Savannah Institute, which I don't know if you guys did that last year, but basically I said all the different types of trees, and I knew based on my spacing that I wanted 200 M7 or M11 apple trees, and I wanted 50 chestnut trees and all this stuff. And I basically just sent it to them, and then they sourced it all and consolidated it into a single pickup for me. So it was on Earth Day 2016 that I got my stuff and I started planting right away. So that's who I went through. And they had their own sources for genetics and what nurseries do certain tests. So that's who I went through.
I just wanted to follow up that we did not do the bulk plant program this year with one of our so there's 3 employees for the Savannah Institute. That's me, Christy, is one, and the 2 co-directors. One of them was on paternity leave for a good portion of the spring, and the other one is doing a postdoc in France. And so coordinating the bulk plant program just couldn't happen this year, but we hope to have it again for next year. So check the newsletters towards the end of this year, and we'll get hopefully the bulk plant program up and running again for next year. And then we've got a couple of questions here with the chat function. So for those of you joining us by phone, Teresa is asking, where did you put the mulberry trees?
Yeah, so I actually haven't planted any mulberry trees because I had originally planned to propagate them myself. But in the future, I definitely incorporate mulberry trees based on just their wide range of functions. But we have so much mulberries on our forage edge of our woods that we even were able to utilize those a little bit with our pigs in the future. But in the future, I would plant mulberries that I propagate myself because I think they're so easy and cheap to produce yourself that we definitely want to incorporate them across our farm. Do you want me to just keep going down so you can read? Gary asked, what are the pasture grass and forage varieties? I planted 18 different species in our pasture, and you can go onto the Prairie Creek Seed Company. It's centered out of Iowa, and they're a local company, and they have a diverse master mix that has, I think, 12 different species in it of red clover, white clover, pistolium, alfalfa, bird's foot in it, and then it has all the different grass species like orchard, timothy, tall, and meadow fescue. I'm missing some of them, but it's very diverse. And then they have an herbal mix too. They had chicory, plantain, and shepherd's. I don't know. It's something, and then a burnet. But there's like 4 or 6 in that are more herbal to help have higher medicinal values in our pasture, so the cows can self-regulate and or self-medicate themselves. But then they also those had so much production, those different herbal mix species. So having that diversity, we were really trying to just focus on getting as much diversity out there as we possibly could. John asked how have we dealt with shade for our livestock, and it's been an issue on your cattle farm. On our farm, our cattle are left out to bear it, basically. There's only 1 paddock or 2 paddocks in our entire pasture that have any trees on them. So we've tried to select for cattle that can handle the heat, and not all cattle can do that. And so that's definitely an issue. So in the future, what I've considered, and I'm trying to figure out how I can maybe plant a fast-growing tree to provide shade very quickly out on our pastures, because the stress for me is we're losing performance and health in our cattle a little bit by just having them have to deal with the heat. And so having those trees out there eventually, that's something we're trying to figure out. For our pigs and our sheep, we actually repurposed the dairy component of the calf huts, which are light and easy to move around. So our sheep and our pigs, we use calf huts out on our pasture to help them with protection from the elements. Again, with any of these questions, if you have a follow-up question, just put it in the chat too. I'm reading them. Rachel. Hey there, Rachel. I know you. So, asked, is there a research component to your tree planting, and are you taking any measurements regarding yield impact? Yes, we did do a research project with SARE and with Savannah Institute through SARE, and we tested the different types of tree tubes, so the Tree Pro, the Arbor Shield, and the Blue X, and we let different plots. We had the sheep go in and be able to graze next to them, and they weren't fenced off, and then other places that the pigs were able to go in, and we measured what their impact was on basically if they killed the tree or if they grazed it, if they knocked down the weeds. And what we're able to find is that pretty much the Arbor Shield protects the tree from anything. Cows, pigs, sheep, they don't mess with it. But again, the Arbor Shield is expensive, and I cut myself pretty bad setting those up with the barbs. The Blue Shield, or anything other than Arbor Shield, the Blue Shield, or the Blue X and Tree Pro, they get destroyed by pigs, no matter what. The pigs find it fun to root them up, and they're just curious, so they're going to destroy anything that's not Arbor Shield. You need to fence the pigs out. The sheep are a little bit different story. They are pretty good with the Miracle Pro or Tree Pro tubes because they're a little bit more sturdy, and they offer a little bit more resilience. But like the Blue Shield, it's hard to know without working with them, but they're pretty flimsy, and basically the sheep were able to knock them over or ruin the tree inside of it because it collapsed so easily when they rubbed up against it. So that was our main impact. And cattle, they're going to rub and break stuff really easily, so you need to fence them off of anything other than the Arbor Shield. The weed pressure, they did take the weeds down a good amount, but I don't know if it was enough to really affect competition. And again, in our system, we didn't really mow that much, and we let the plants map themselves out to protect with competition. Okay, John has another question. If properly fenced off, could you go without tubes and stakes for the trees? Yes, if you properly fenced off, I think you'd at least be able to protect from your livestock. You still maybe have issues with voles. If you don't have a tube on there that's next to the ground, you might have issues with voles. which we haven't, and also deer. And again, we haven't had too much issue with deer on our farm for some reason either. But yeah, the one thing that the tubes really do help with is they kind of create a nice living condition or environment for the trees to really grow. It kind of creates maybe a greenhouse environment and it collects some water and moisture there, which has its drawbacks too. It might also be able to harbor more insects or shelter for them or disease and stuff. But for us, we really think that where the tree tubes were used, especially the tree pearl or miracle pearl, that they flourished. Mark asked, how large were your trees when you planted them initially? We just got the little whips at the beginning. So some of the shrubs were only 6-8 inches, but most of our trees were in that 1 to 2 feet range. And that's why we had to also plant with a shovel, because the root systems were good size. But just 1 to 1.5, 2 feet, depending on which species it was.
I've got a question. So Casey Dell highly recommends using 5-foot tree tubes to keep the deer away, especially because he has that as a major problem on his property. Do you have any recommendations as far as tree tube height?
Sure, that's a great question. I can't speak from experience because I've only used 5-foot tree tubes based on that advice. But I don't have deer pressure on my trees. The only thing that maybe every once in a while they'll knock the entire tree tube and stake over, and then they can eat something if they wanted to. But they don't bother with the 5-foot. Now, when you have a bigger tree tube, though, you need to make sure you get a long enough stake so that it can go far enough into the ground and hold it up. Otherwise, if the top end isn't attached to a stake or supported, it'll get knocked over by the wind or the animals or something like that potentially. Okay, John, are you grazing any of the livestock groups together or all in leader-follower? Can you describe your leader-follower progression and any key lessons learned? Sure. When I got started, I listened to and read the Joel Salatin books about bringing the chickens behind the other classes of livestock, and I did that my first year on a much smaller scale. It was manageable. But we've really tried to convert as much land as possible and into the grassland to protect it from soil erosion and provide the habitat, those type of things. And cattle are really scalable. It's really easy to go from 20 cattle to 50 cattle to last year 200. It was really easy to do that. So the cows take up 5 acres a day, paddocks. So they are moving through our system on a foot basis very, very far. The fence distances between a front and a back fence might be 800 feet. And none of our other class of livestock move anywhere near as close to that. So the cows are literally kind of leaving them in the dust. And so we kind of left behind the notion of using like the chickens right behind the cattle, just because it's too far for them to go and it's too much moving of the shelters, takes too long, and like it stresses the animal, like the livestock other than the cows to move that far. They're just not used to it. So what we're doing is right now in our establishment phase is allowing the cattle to graze everything. They're utilizing everything except for the silvopasture. And then our chickens are in a certain area each year. And over the years, we'll move the chickens and where their disturbance and their impact, we'll spread that out throughout our farm. And maybe as they grow into a larger part of our farm, we can maybe start incorporating more of that leader-follower system. And the pigs and sheep, again, they're just on such a smaller scale that that they're just utilizing that 8-acre paddock. If you're in a smaller farm or a more moderate-sized farm, that I would say you can definitely incorporate and get better benefits from having that leader-follower system. But just for the reality of our farm, we don't really have that. We do incorporate a leader-follower system within our cattle herd, and what we'll do is we'll have our our cattle are finishers, the ones that we're trying to fatten up and finish and grow as fast as possible. We let them go through the paddock first. And then we have a space, a one-day gap, and then the next day our cow-calf herd comes through. And they utilize that same pasture 2 days later. And what that does is that we're basically taking the cream of the crop and putting it towards our cattle that we want to grow, and we don't want them to have to compete very much because we want them to, you know, reserve as much energy to grow as possible. Our cows and calves don't have as high of nutritional needs, so they can get the seconds and still thrive and get what they need and reach their nutritional and energy requirements by coming through second. By doing that, we're able to run 2 herds, but they're utilizing the same fencing and water setup. So we're utilizing or experiencing some type of efficiency by having them share, but just not at the same time. We were kind of told to be cautious about the leader-follower system with cattle, but we're loving it. We really, really liked it. Rachel asks, which animals are your favorite, which are a headache, and which are most profitable? My favorite animals are my cattle. A herd of 200 cows and getting to know them and just seeing what they can do to the grass, like, it's just, I get really excited. And I hope that in the future I can bring on more people to transition the farm so that I can take mainly just focus on cattle eventually. The biggest headache are pigs. Last year we had some pigs that just would not respect the smart fence, and they knew that if they could run under it quick, they wouldn't get zapped. So they would go to their neighbor's farm every once in a while. So you need to make sure you're training your pigs well to the electric fence. The least headache is the sheep, because even when the sheep do manage to get out, like if the windstorm knocks over the electric netting, they are so easy to shepherd back into wherever you want them. I actually kind of enjoy when they get out because I get to go for a walk and I feel like I'm at least somewhat skilled because I can get them back where I need them. Most profitable, laying hens are the most profitable for us and very scalable. Our pasture poultry are also profitable on a per animal basis and per labor. But we got to develop our markets for that. But yeah, those would be. I also really like our laying hens and how we have that set up. My highlight of the winter, at least, is collecting eggs every day. Mark asks, what did you use for protecting your chickens from predators? Our broilers and turkeys are in those Salatin chicken tractors, so those are pretty tough for them to get into anyway, so we haven't really lost any from that. Our free-range chickens, we do have electric fencing out, which works more often than not. We do have some predator issues here and there. Like last night we had the first predator issue all winter long. But for the most part, the electric netting keeps them out, and we're actually getting a livestock guardian pup for our chickens. We got a pup last year, but he bonded more to larger animals, so he didn't really stick around with the chickens, so he's now going to the sheep, and our new pup is going to go with the chickens. But for the most part with the chickens, we found that just being around them and having our scent keeps some of the predators, and that electric fencing helps so much. So, and then he also asked, is the electric netting overhead or just on the sides? Just on the sides. It varies between 3 and 4 feet tall, and that's enough to, like, the only animal that could jump over is a coyote, and I don't think they're motivated enough. And it keeps all of the ground predators like raccoons and possums out for the most part.
And we've got another caller with a question. So go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about your marketing? Are you direct marketing everything, wholesale? Where's all these animals going?
Awesome. I like talking about that. We're a mix of direct marketing and commodity scale and wholesale scale. So for our cattle, we finished about 100 head last year, and we sold roughly a quarter of that through our direct marketing, which we sell online and mainly at farmers markets. I'm not as good at marketing online yet, but I'm really, my enthusiasm and energy comes out in a farmers market setting, and so we do really well at farmers markets. Our eggs, we also produce enough of those, and right now we're getting 17 dozen a day, and we're hoping to produce about 450 dozen a week this summer. We sell those at farmers markets and online, but we also have another farm that partners with us that we sell them about 250 dozen a week, and we're trying to get into grocers and retail outlets and like campuses and that type of stuff in the future to be able to scale up and become more profitable in our eggs. For our sheep, pigs, and turkeys and meat chickens, we sell all that through our direct marketing online and through farmers markets. I can go into more about that if there's a little bit more pointed questions. For some other questions, I actually talk more about our farmers markets that we go to. We do a local, more small scale, much more laid back and low key type of market. And then we're also targeting, we're about 2 hours from Chicago, and we're trying to get into 1 to 2 farmers markets a week there at markets that get between 2,000 to 5,000 visitors per week. We did one market last year in Oak Park, and we developed a really good following. People really liked us. Once they got to know us and understand our values, they really bonded and became loyal to us. And so we're able to sell a lot of product down there, make the most of our time, and we're selling like over 100 dozen eggs a week for a pretty nice premium for free range and organic. And then we're also, right now, our next phase in our direct marketing business is we're trying to set up food hubs. So rather than having a farmer's market where you need to go there every single week to have access to the customers, is have a food hub where you go to a community once a month. They do pre-orders. You take it and have a central location where they pick up their orders, and then they don't see you again until the next month. And what you need to do in that situation is you need to substitute your face-to-face weekly interaction from a farmer's market by having email and online presence and a relationship with them in that sense. So that's one thing I haven't had time for in the past, but we're trying to develop in the future. And we're really excited. We launched a new website that's geared specifically for that, and we really like it. All right, so Josh has a question in the chat room. Are you vaccinating livestock? Could you comment on pest management strategies for your cattle, if any, besides poultry funneling behind them? For our livestock, you hear so many different approaches to this issue with a farm, and what we've found is that we don't vaccinate any of our animals. The only thing that we've ever considered vaccinating for really is pink eye in our cattle, but we found that we're pretty really ruthless in our culling selection to have animals that are resistant and tolerant of any type of disease that we deal with. So our cattle, we don't have, our only thing that we ever have to deal with is ringworm, and that's a 1-year thing when they're younger. And that goes away, and then they're immune for that. We don't have really other issues other than pink eye. But sunshine, fresh air, and genetics go a long way to making sure your livestock can handle just the natural things that are happening. We're really focused on trying to reach a homeostasis or equilibrium with our animals. All people have some type of parasites and worms and something in them, and they're affected with diseases all the time, but don't necessarily get sick. I mean, I know that I stay in good condition despite having plenty of pests and disease around me. But because I have maybe genetics, but also I have good food, and then I have good water, clean water, sunshine, fresh air, that type of stuff to keep me healthy. Animals that aren't able to maintain a healthy equilibrium with the natural loads in our system, we don't want them around, and we want their genetics, or maybe it's even bad luck, but more often than not, it's genetics that we want to eliminate from our farm. So by treating and for these things, if we wormed our animals, we'd actually be breeding and selecting for the parasites or the pests that are able to survive those treatments. You never have 100% success or kill rate on those. And so you're always breeding stronger and stronger, and you're wiping clean the slate for your own animals that they can't reach that equilibrium and get a balance. So they're always unbalanced in a sense. So that's our mentality, is to let the animals handle it on themselves, and we really haven't had any issues with it at all. You might get a couple animals that get wormy here and there, but they do fine as a whole. With the pest management and that type of stuff, we feed kelp and salt to our livestock, which seems to help a little bit with the flies, and we also have a organic Crystal Creek no-fly oil rub that the cattle can use that is supposed to help fend off the flies. It doesn't work perfectly by any means, or it'd be a stretch maybe to even say it works well, but that's something we have tried. For us, hopefully eventually there'll be enough birds and we're moving the cattle far enough that they're staying away from a lot of the diseases. And that brings me, I should have said that at the beginning, is that a lot of the rotation is just going to separate the animals from their pest and their life cycle. So if you're having a set stock system where your livestock are on the same paddock for a long, long time, where the 3-week or so life cycle of their parasite is able to come and go, and they're still in the presence of that, then they're going to be affected by that parasite. But if you're rotating them and have a long rotation, say 40 days, that 3-week life cycle of your parasite has already gone through, and that parasite has starved because there was nothing for it to feed off of. So having rotations really helps with that. Kathy asked, for your meat animals, explain how and where you slaughter or package. That's a really good question too. We're in the south of Madison, about 45 minutes, about 20 minutes from the Illinois border in Monticello. And since we sell into Chicago across state lines, we need to have, and Wisconsin, we need a federal inspection by the USDA. And so we go to the nearest federally inspected processing facility or butcher plant, and that's in Lena for us. It's just south of the Wisconsin-Illinois border, and it's a small mom-and-pop butcher and processing facility. And we get it all. We just take the live animals there. They slaughter, package. We pick up, take it to cold storage in our own freezers, and we go from there. So we don't do any of the processing other than our eggs. We do all of our egg processing on the farm.
Just to go back to the support that you were mentioning for farmers, how did you find out about the support originally?
My first exposure to the different cost-sharing programs that are out there was very, very brief in my academics in UW-Stevens Point. We learned about agricultural lands like one day in my entire career there, and they brought up Equipped, and I was kind of, well, I wonder what that program's about. And I guess I did a lot of research before I came back to the farm. I probably spent 2 years worth of reading online and reading books about trying to get as much of a base of knowledge as I could in a context to apply. And I think I just must have along the way heard people talk about Equipped and different programs. And if you're wondering about where to find that, I would go to local UW Extension office, or not, I guess that's in Wisconsin, the UW Extension, or like county extension, or the USDA or FSA. Just go in and ask them and say, hey, this is my ideas, I'm looking for some help. They'll hear you out and be able to at least maybe point you in the right direction, or say, okay, this is the expert in here. The other thing is you can ask the other farmers in your community what they've done. I know in Wisconsin there's a lot of people in the grazing community that maybe they don't advertise that they've done equipped contracts, but if you ask them, oh yeah, I did this, and this is what our experiences were, and they'll tell you, this is what you should do when you try to do that, or this is, avoid this agent because they don't quite get it and they're focused on other stuff, and this one's really, really receptive and wants to help with this and really great to work with. I've been lucky in my county that I'm not like best friends by any means with them, but they love what I'm trying to do. They want me to succeed, and they're really flexible. And I've been trying to tell other people in my community to also look at that. Yeah, and I want to keep going on that. Is when you're going to talk maybe to like your NRCS agent, a lot of farmers, not just grazers, but all types of farmers, know that they have money available. And so what they'll do is they'll say, hey, can you come out to a farm visit? And my agents shared this with me, and a lot of times they'll get to the farm and they'll say, hi, so what are you thinking? And he goes, I don't know, you want to look around and tell me what you can give me money for? They do not like doing that because, one, a lot of times those type of situations, they're just wasting their time. Those people don't actually have a plan, don't have any follow-up. They really don't have any motivation to go through it other than the money. And the NRCS agents aren't trying to make farmers more profitable. They're trying to make them more, have more conservation in their practices. So one of the best things that you can do is have a plan. It doesn't matter if it's terrible and it's going to be, you're not even going to use that, it's going to be totally reworked. Just showing them that you've thought about this, and this is where you think your perimeter fencing should go, and where you'd have water tanks, that type of stuff. That can give you so much more credibility that your work, especially if you don't have any relationship with them before. When I came back from college, my NRCS agents didn't even know my name or anything. I called them up. I said, hey, I know I'm interested in equip contract. I just started farming. They came out and they're like, okay, well, let's go look. I'm like, well, can I go grab my plan, like my map of what it is? And his eyes kind of got big, and he's like, you got a plan? And I came out and took it, and he just looked at it, and he's like, whoa, wow, you really thought a lot about this. And he like instantly kind of like pepped up, and he's like, can I have a copy of this? And literally that copy, we did a few different tweaks. But he told me after the fact, is like just showing that you're that interested and dedicated to it made him really excited to work with me. And these government agents, and they are overworked. They have a lot of contracts to deal with, a lot of maintenance of them, and they're overworked. And so showing them that you're the one that is worth them to put extra effort into, I found that was sometimes with my own procrastination tendencies, I was saved a little bit because they wanted to help me the most.
Cool. Thanks. All right, we're a little past 7:30, so I want to be respectful of people's time. And so if there's no other questions, kind of go slowly here in case there's a lingering question. Sure. Do you want to say something quick? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say again that I'm totally open for any questions. If you send me email or text message or a message on Facebook, that I'm happy to help you out, or even look at what your plans are, and at least share what my thoughts are on them. I'd be happy to do that. I like doing that type of stuff.
Thanks so much, Jacob. And for the talk, and then also for your generous offer to be available even afterwards. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us, and thanks again to everybody for joining us tonight. And I hope everybody has a great night.